Hello class, I just wanted to do a little bit of review on chapter 4 to help with the homework and to get ready for the upcoming test. When we're looking at chapter 4, remember this is the graphing of all 6 trig functions. You need to make sure you know how to deal with sine and cosine probably the best, and make sure the applet on Math Excel for School you understand how that works, especially with things like phase shifts, vertical shifts, reflections, how to plug those things into your applet on Math Excel. You also need to be able to look at a graph and see how they transform and move around. The homework pieces have a variety of styles of questions. Probably the hardest ones are given the graph, find the equation, so maybe we'll look at that a little bit today as well. So for the first set of questions, what I've done here is tried to write all the information. So this 3 is the amplitude, the period is 2 pi because sine's period is 2 pi divided by b and there's no number in front of x. And then the minus pi over 4 is to the right pi over 4. The x's here would have been the graph before moving it to the right, and then I moved all the spots to the right to pi over 4 to find that location. Some of your questions showcase that. What you might notice is some of the graphs look similar. You want to look at the period distances, and that will probably help determine which equation it's supposed to be. Also realize the amplitude is a stretch vertically by a factor of something. Some of your homework questions ask about that idea, so you want to make sure that you're following along with that process as well. Next question is a little bit more challenging because cotangent is typically not used as often. So you notice here the 4 out front is not the amplitude per se, but it's still used in that regard. Cotangent of 2x, the 2, so the period for cotangent is typically pi, and divide by 2, and then move the graph up 1. So the thing with cotangent that you want to remember is the first asymptote is always on the y-axis, and the second one is the distance of the period. So you noticed on mine here, I have the y-axis and pi over 2. If the period was 2 pi, it'd be the y-axis and 2 pi. Halfway in between those is typically where it hits equilibrium, or the middle ground, but it's shifted up 1. That's why the graph, instead of being here at 0 at pi over 4, is up 1. And then the amplitude number says up 4 from that and down 4 from that. That's where the basic ideas of the graph come from. Most questions with cotangent, your focus should probably be on where the asymptotes are and where the middle ground is. That'll probably get you what you need in terms of those solutions. The next one is secant. So for secant, I'm going to graph it like a cosine function. This graph is moved to the left pi over 4. It's moved down 3. It has an amplitude of 2, but it's not really an amplitude for secant because it goes up and down forever. It's negative, which means it flips over. So if it was cosine, it would start at the top and work its way down and up. Since it's negative, it's going to start down and work its way up and back down. So for this situation, that's why my graph starts way down here, because if it was cosine, it would start in this location, then here, 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 and finally back to its original spot. I move them all over and flip them. So any spot that would have hit the equilibrium, which I moved down 3, that's why I have that dotted line horizontally at -3. Any spot that hits there would be an asymptote, and then the graph opens up in its opposite directions. For secant and cosecant, I would probably focus on the highest and lowest points to figure out the amplitude, and then see if the graph's moved up or down at all. But I would focus on those ideas first, and I think that'll probably help in order to find the answers to those questions. The next questions we're going to look at are given the graph and find the equation. My suggestion on these is to figure out if it's sine or cosine or what version of a graph you're looking at. Focus on the origin when it's dealing with sine and cosine. So for example, this starts at the origin, so it's probably a sine graph. Then deal with the amplitude. So the amplitude is 3. That's why it's a 3 here. And it's negative because it starts going downward. If you notice these equilibrium points are shifted up some or down some, that's where the plus minus would come into play for like adding 2 if it was up 2, for example. But the focus should be, does it look like the sine wave type of idea, or does it start at the top and make kind of the C, which would be the cosine wave, as you're dealing with those questions. The next one is 3 cosecant x, and I figured that out because of the following. If you look here, it's kind of centered at 0, 0 because there's an asymptote in these 3 locations, which means the period is 2 pi. But then the graph goes up to 3, back, and then down to 3 and back. This question is actually similar to the last one. It's just not negative. So that's why it's 3. And it's cosecant because its sine's graph flipped around, so that's why it's opening up in the other directions. Again, I know those questions are probably the more challenging ones. Focus on the amplitude aspect of the question and which trig function it is, and that should help focus you in on what you need to find. When it comes to tangent and cotangent graphs, you can have some flexibility, But my suggestion is anytime you have a tangent and cotangent graph, you want to try to avoid phase shifts or horizontal shifts as much as possible. So this graph technically could be a tangent graph just shifted over to the right. Most likely for your homework questions, they want you to treat it as if it was cotangent because remember, cotangent has an asymptote on the y-axis and then wherever the period is. Now for this question, what you also should notice is the graph is going in the upward direction, where the original cotangent graph should be going in the downward direction. Well, what that tells you right away is it's a negative. And then the amplitude number, if you notice, we got up one, down one, so there really isn't an amplitude number besides the negative sign. It's cotangent and then 1/2 x because the period here is 2 pi, but remember tangent's period is normally pi, and so I would have to take pi divided by 1/2, which actually multiplies it by 2, to figure out that it's cotangent of 1/2 of x. Don't forget the x-axis reflection here. I would focus a little bit more, maybe try those questions a couple times to make sure you've got the right idea when it comes to making your own equation. Have a good day, everyone.